Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing? Well,
Great. Good morning.
good. Thank you. I was wondering if anybody was here. Hey, welcome to the August edition of Coffee with Carl. Glad everybody could be with us today. Hope everybody's drying out. What a heck of a week we've had. Thankful that we didn't get as worse. Let me start over. Take two. Glad that things did not go according to what the worst case scenarios were. How's that? We were very fortunate that there was a lot of flooding, but we could deal with a little bit of rain. It was the wind and the trees down that we were really worried about. So anyway, a couple things, and I got a special guest, but I want to start off with a couple quick bits. You know what, today, you got to start all these things off with what day it is. Let me take a deep breath. Happy National Women's Day. Happy Melon Day. Happy Hold Hands Day. Happy Passion Fruit Day. It's also National Rice Pudding Day, National Betty Boop Day, National Book Lovers Day, and National Co-working Day. Today is also known as Let's Not Offend Anybody Day, apparently, because we have everybody covered in one group or another. So all that to be said, it's great to be with you on a Friday and in August as things starting to ramp up. At least schools in the Midlands are all opening up, and it feels like there's more energy. So I usually spend a few minutes talking about the economy and all this other stuff, but I got such a cool guest today that I think I'm going to jump right in. And many of y'all have seen Brian before, but Brian Dearberry, the Charleston Chamber of Commerce. Brian is a major stud. He's one of my favorite people. He's been at the Charleston Chamber since 2011 and has also served as CEO of 3 other chambers, Catawba County in North Carolina and the Middletown area chamber up in Delaware. Isn't that right? But what you don't know is the guy is so daggum smart. I didn't even know this. I knew he went to Wittenberg University in Ohio, magna cum laude. I mean, I don't even know how somebody can do that in college, but back then it was a different day. I guess you studied all the time or whatever, but such a nerd. Just kidding. I do, in all seriousness, he's a colleague, but he's also more like a brother. So I love Brian to death and appreciate him taking the time to be with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. I don't know how to even respond to that introduction. It's also National See the Sun Shine in Charleston, South Carolina Day. And after our friend Tropical Storm Debbie hung out for almost a week, we're thrilled that she's through. And I know that Carl and I are going to spend a little bit of time today talking about what's occurring with our environment, specifically South Carolina, East Coast regions. And it was quite a week here, almost 15.5 inches of rain in 1 week. So we didn't quite hit the 1,000-year rain of 2015 totals, but it was a tough week on the peninsula.
Well, let me ask real quickly before we get into, I want to start right off with the resiliency stuff, but everybody, your family and everybody at your work family, everybody good, made it through the storm?
Yes, thankfully, while it was a ton of rain and some pretty crazy wind conditions on Tuesday, we were fortunate and blessed down here that it was only a tropical storm and didn't reach up into the hurricane category.
Good. Well, great. Well, let's talk about that. Brian and I just spent a week in Dallas together last month, and for our National Association of Chamber of Commerce Execs meeting, and the CEOs of large chambers get around and talk and pontificate and solve many of the world's problems all within a short period of time. But out of that comes great conversations about things that each community all the communities that we live in need to be dealing with. And some of those we really addressed last month were the resiliency issues. Most namely, there are a lot of places around the East Coast and the Gulf Coast that are having to deal with flooding and rising tides. So let's talk about that. Y'all are right in the thick of it.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. One of the data points we had from a keynoter was back in 1980, if you were going to have these type of catastrophic events, it was never more than 3 a year, and they were below the $1 billion total cost range. In 2023, 2024, we popped up over 18 to 20 per year, all being more than $1 billion in associated costs. So the keynoter pointed out that our environmental conditions have changed dramatically. And I think what that means for resiliency in our state and along the coastline, east, Gulf and west, is that we're going to have to be a lot smarter in the years ahead. And we're going to need to invest a lot of money to make ourselves hardened with regard to the ability to withstand some of those catastrophic storms.
Yeah,
I
just
was
to repeat,
fascinated, Carl. I had no idea that it had jumped, almost 36 events in the last 2 years,
so
compared to 40 years ago when we would have had 4 to 6.
let me just repeat this just for everybody to get this. So Rebecca Ryan was a speaker. Rebecca has been to Columbia, spends a lot of time in your area as well, but Rebecca is an economist and futurist. But we averaged for more than 3 or 4 decades, 3 times a year on average, $1 billion catastrophic storm event. And that could have been a hurricane, that could have been flood, that could have been a fire. But we had 3 on average in the United States a year over $1 billion. Now there's one every 3 weeks. That is just fascinating data that, one, is going everybody's insurance costs. That's one of the reasons why they're all going up. But from a resilience, from a community standpoint, how do we plan for it? And what do y'all, I mean, y'all are in the downtown. They closed downtown traffic. You couldn't even get to the peninsula in Charleston this week on a couple of days.
Yeah, I really want to hold up Mayor Cogswell and our police, fire, public safety folks. They did a fantastic job, as well as Charleston, Dorchester, and Berkeley counties folks. I think the reality is that's becoming a much more common occurrence, even when there isn't a major storm. There can be flooding with high sea levels and storm surge conditions. So one of the things we've been looking at, along with all the folks just named, is what do we do in the years ahead to work in cooperation with the Army Corps of Engineers to really begin to find some solutions with regard to ways to make sure that that is not going to be something that disrupts our day-to-day lives and our economy. So we're knee deep in that, and I think you'll hear a lot more in the next couple of years. So looking at all the factors that could ameliorate that, but it's real, and it's occurring at a much higher frequency. So there's going to be significant investment in the years ahead to address that issue.
And that couples with a few other things. I mean, both of our regions are growing rapidly. Yours far greater. In the last few years, you've really grown exponentially. And Charleston has limited access places. I mean, there's water everywhere, right? I mean, you got to think about flooding, not only from downtown, the peninsula, but also where you're building, how you're building, which is also, I want to talk about workforce. And it bleeds into that as well, because as more people come in, with the more people we need to have employed, we got to build housing. We got to find a place for them to live and above sea level. How we do it.
It's interesting. Carl mentioned we were just with 1,100 chamber leaders in Dallas, and there were 4 issues that are defining our regions. And it doesn't matter if you're in the Pacific Northwest or in Florida or up in New England. Attainable housing is number 1. Number 2, interestingly, we've spent some time on it with our Metro Chamber Coalition, and we'll spend a lot more time in the upcoming legislative session: affordable, accessible daycare. Number 3, Carl mentioned workforce, a 21st century ready workforce. And then the other factor we're all facing is how do we continue to move people around in our communities? So looking at multimodal transportation systems, those are the four big pillars that regions are going to have to wrap their arms around to be able to be competitive and have high qualities of life in place in the years ahead. And attainable housing, I think, is at a crisis pitch. I know in our metro market and many of the folks we talk to across the country, and it takes a long time to build. It's very expensive. And most of our communities, unfortunately, are geared to build single family homes. So that large missing middle of duplexes, multiplexes, townhouses, apartments that we desperately need, along with the comfort level of being able to build up to gain greater density and height, is going to be significant in the years ahead. So I think how are we doing, to your question, is we've got the problems in our sight lines. And now over the next decade, Carl, I think all four of those are going to require the business community and our public partners to be aligned and tackling them like never before.
Yeah,
I've never envisioned that I would drive by so many neighborhoods that say homes starting at $1 million.
right.
That's, when you look at what it costs to live in those neighborhoods, you look at the average median incomes of our workforce in our regions, that's no longer sustainable. It's just not realistic. So how much we build, the price point at which we build, and our ability to think around density are all going to be critical factors as we move out over the next 10 to 50 years.
Yeah. It's almost daunting at in some point to think that nationally, I think the number is like 7 million homes that we need to build that we've underbuilt over the last 15, 20 years. Locally, it's obviously a lot smaller here in Columbia than what y'all need as well, but the need is still there. And the regulatory burden that we're seeing built, and some is absolutely necessary. I get that, but we've got to find that balance, to your point, of attainable housing, and attainable and affordable are two different things, and varies per market. So we've got to come up with a better definition, or better understanding of what we currently, the inventory, what we have, what we don't have, and bless you. I'm glad those $1 million homes are popping up, because they subsidize a lot of the tax needs that your community has and what we have as well. But it's not for everybody, obviously.
Yeah, attainable, to your point, Carl, it runs the whole spectrum of home purchasing and renters. I think a lot of times we think, oh, it's only a certain segment of the population that cannot either rent or buy. I think what we're finding when we drill down on our statistics is it's everybody. And the other interesting thing, because the housing stock is low, is that homes that would normally be a second home after you've had a starter home or you've rented or leased and move into a home, now the pressure comes that people that would typically not purchase those homes might purchase them and do major renovations or a tear down and a reconstruct. So all along the continuum of home buyers, there's deep pressure for the availability of homes to either rent or to purchase. So you're spot on with regard to stock.
Yeah.
We know here that with our growth rate, every year we need 7,800 dwelling units that are occupiable each and every year. Going back to 2008, we've done that only 3 times in that time frame.
Wow.
So this is the old, we're going to take you back to Econ 101 this morning, Friday class, you're kind of dragging in.
Yeah.
This is the law of supply and demand. Very simple. Our demand is dramatically outstripping our supply. And I think that's the case in almost every metropolitan area in the country. So we've got to find solutions. We've got to be very adept at doing that as rapidly as possible. And I think one other factor we may not have mentioned that I think we really need to be thoughtful around is that housing stock near major employment centers? Because That's going to extend the
That's right.
potential for our infrastructure to be sufficient. When we look at affordable, accessible daycare, we heard of a teacher recently that teaches in Charleston County schools. She's got a nice job in an elementary school, but she's got to drive 50 minutes to take her child to daycare every day and then go pick them up. There are hundreds and thousands of incidences like that. And we've just got to be smarter about how we structure our overall community.
Yeah. Well, let's move on for a second to a couple of the other issues that are hitting South Carolina. We talked about them a little bit this year. Next year, we've got to get a little bit more traction at the State House, and we're working with Columbia and Charleston and Greenville and Myrtle Beach and Charlotte chambers collectively as our Metro Chambers Coalition to talk about workforce and dependent care. And you and I talked a lot about child care. I argue that dependent care, the aging population, more workers are having to deal with aging parents as much as they're dealing with children as well. So I blur those two together. So pardon me if I intermingle those words, but childcare is such a big deal. Since COVID, 20% of all childcare facilities have closed. Birth rates have lowered greatly, which is also a concern. But what do we need to do for our state to think about how we get employees fully back to employment? Because this actually couples with, South Carolina's growing. We're one of the fastest growing states, but our labor participation rate is number 5. We're fifth in the country, fifth lowest labor participation rate. And one of those reasons is because of lack of childcare.
Yeah.
So what do we need to do?
I'm going to call you Mr. Perfect Storm this morning. As you weave all these factors together. The other biggie is that low labor participation rate. And since the pandemic, the number of US workers in the job market working every day is almost 1 million less than what it was going into 2020. So we've got that double whammy. And the battle for talent is greater than it has ever been. I can remember at certain points in my career where we would say, oh, we'll just go get it from California, or we'll go get it from Michigan, or every sector of our nation now is battling with regard to available talent. So I like dependent care. I think you should trademark that.
Okay.
I know in our family right now, my wife is legal guardian for both her uncle, who is without children and is 86 years old, and her mother, who's 90. So I think either end of the spectrum, you think of young families and spending anywhere from 15 to 25% of their annual income on childcare is just not sustainable. We have young families leaving our market due to a lack of access and due to the high cost of childcare. So again, I think the states that win with regard to thinking about how do we take care of young employees with families are going to be the ones that are most competitive in gaining talent. We did some good stuff in the legislature this time. As you mentioned, our Metro Chamber Coalition will be working with our government relations staff to identify other approaches with regard to either tax breaks when employers provide employees with assistance for daycare, the potential for multiple businesses to come together in a proximate area and do a collaborative daycare operation. There are lots of things that we're looking at right now that are best practices. It's imperative that we get our arms wrapped around this. 27%, as Carl shared, of the folks that are on the sidelines and not working, it's because they can't afford to have their children in a daycare facility. So we could immediately boost our labor participation rate by giving those folks relief and allowing them to have the opportunity to come back to work. The other thing that it's interesting, it depresses our birth rate as a state. We've talked to a lot of young members and they've said, we're delaying if we have another child or when we have our first child because of the cost associated with doing it.
Well, heck, you almost have to get your child on a wait list for daycare before you even have a baby. That's the crazy thing. And anyway, that's more planning than I thought of, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think Gil and I never had that in our equation.
Yeah.
I think the other reality is that we're wrestling with a totally dynamic new work environment.
Right.
And part of that work environment is going to require us to look at who we're hiring, how we're keeping them, how they will work every day, the skill sets that they'll need in a digitized economy, which are significantly different. And then also the power of soft skills, not only for customer interaction, but interaction within the organization itself. What you're doing under your roof is going to have to look dramatically different.
Well, let's tie that into the workforce because we everybody's dealing with that issue. We got a lot of large employers. They're on the call with us. I see my friend Mike Harris, Blue Cross, and Poonam with Scout Motors, and they're all looking at keeping workforce. And it's not just big employers, right? It's anybody right now is having to deal with how do we get people into the workforce? How do we get future ready skills? How do we assess those? And so let me ask you a couple questions. What are some of the things y'all are seeing, and what are the ways that we can help over the next 20, 25 years find these critical skills?
Yeah, Carl and I were fortunate to sit through a keynote on day 2 of the conference in Dallas with a thought leader named Valerie Grubb. And Valerie looked out over the next 25 years and said, hey, if you're building your workforce for success between now and 2050, what does it need to look like? And I think we were both blown away. We talked a lot about what we had learned over a couple of adult beverages that evening, and it's pretty daunting. One of her big things is the demand for digital skills is absolutely going through the roof. And she said every employer is going to be well benefited by both encouraging and looking for digital literacy. And they said, when you're looking for that, you're in all likelihood going to be looking at millennials and Gen Zers because they've lived their whole lives doing that. They're comfortable doing it. And she said, we're going to see, a really big push around data analytics, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence that's a nascent productivity approach, but we see more and more Americans utilizing that in the workplace. So, I think those are 3 big ones that we have to be wise around. But she said that has to be balanced with regard to soft skills.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And, everything from communication, problem solving, adaptability, cross-organizational teamwork, they go together. So, I think we used to say, oh, that's just a geeky tech nerd that's on our team. Well, the reality is that geeky tech nerd is probably going to be half your team, and they need to be embedded in everything you do. So I think when you pair those two, the high-end digital skills along with, it's interesting to call them soft skills. There's some background to that, but we'll save it for another day. I think they're imperative skills, the ability to see each other, to work collaboratively together, to see and understand where your customers are coming from. So that's one of the big takeaways is it's going to look really different when it comes to the importance of a team that has high levels of digital skills.
Yeah. And to that point, there's a big piece in recruiting new talent, and there's also a big piece in retaining talent because the turnover ratio has gotten so high, and it's expensive to hire and to train employees. So let's talk about some of the things that we learned or you saw at this conference on what attracting talent, but also retaining talent.
Yeah, I was blown away the other day, Carl. I asked one of our advanced manufacturers when they need to replace a mid-level manager or up, what are their replacement costs? And I had a number in mind, but the number he gave back was a blow away. 6 times their compensation and benefits to replace a high-level, mid to upper-level performer.
Wow.
So imagine what happens every time one of those people walk out your door. Not only is it the immediate stress on your team as you look for that person, but I think we all know if anyone on the chat box can say that they're hiring comparable talent for a lesser price when they hire somebody new, I will write the foreword to your book and I will for you. I think we all know that when we go to that replacement equation, it's anywhere from 10 to 20 to 25% higher by the time you're all done. So I think to your question on retention strategies, one of the biggies we picked up on, and it was surprising because I think normally we go to compensation, bennies, the millennials and Gen Z, which will form the majority of our workforce over that 25-year period coming up, are their number one priority is continuous learning. So they are always wanting to be learning. So development programs for your teams will be significant. They want to grow their skills and advance their careers. So that was number one in all the survey research that she had done on those two generation groups. I think the other thing that we forget sometimes is that the power of recognition within the workplace is extremely significant. I may come and think that I'm doing a job that's not really important. And she gave a beautiful example. She had a young lady that was paying bills for her organization. And the young lady just thought, well, you know, a couple times a month, I'm responsible for accounts payable. Well, when she sat her down and talked about the fact that one of their suppliers had stopped providing the product they needed because the bill hadn't been paid on time, she said all of a sudden that young woman saw herself and recognized what she was doing in a whole new light. So teaching your workforce what it is and how you're all interconnected and how they're all valuable, I think is another thing that's extremely powerful for retention and also promotion. She said that young lady got promoted twice and now she's on running her own business. So I think the third thing, and my dad taught me this a long time ago, and man, was he right, they all leave.
Yeah.
So I think the power of having sustainability and succession planning is really critical because they're going to leave.
Yeah.
And the 10-year time frames for those two generations are somewhere in the 3 to 5 year range. I mean, if you've got a skilled employee that falls in those two camps and they've been with you for 10 years, count yourself doubly lucky.
Yeah.
So I think what we're all becoming is continual training and learning organizations, and that can be extremely powerful when you think about retention.
Let's pivot just a second. And by the way, anybody listening, if y'all have a question, just throw it in the chat or whatever. I don't want to, we do want to hog it, but I do want to be.
Yeah, pipe in if you have a question, or even if you have an insight of something you've done that's really made a difference with regard to loyalty and morale and employee retention.
But let's turn this to a second and say, my preacher always finishes, what does this mean for Monday? Like, all right, we hear about it on Sunday, but what does it really mean from a practical standpoint? What does it mean for Monday? What does this mean for us as we're talking about from a policy standpoint? What do we need to do in Columbia at the State House to help businesses, both large and small, just the ecosystem of the business community in South Carolina? I mean, workforce is a big deal. And I know it's been a priority for them, at least in the House of Representatives this past year, to think through some of these things, childcare, workforce. There are plenty of grants and money flowing for these workforce initiatives, but are they paying off, or what do we need to look a little bit more critical? What do we need to do?
I really like where our state's trending. I know that they're pushing skill development initiatives and everything we talked about, that digital employee, ongoing training and development. I think that's really important that we look across our state for organizations that can partner with regard to making us more sophisticated when it comes to doing that skill development training. I think that's really powerful. I know recently there was the creation of the statewide work development office, and that's looking at streamlining workforce activities, ensuring that we're talking to each other, that we can sustain a capable and competitive workforce. So kudos to the legislature and the governor for setting aside a part of our state government infrastructure that looks solely at workforce development. I think we're striving to have apprenticeship growth. I know this past week, 2 weeks ago, we sat down with our 6 original equipment manufacturers down here, and we talked about an advanced manufacturing talent pipeline for our region. How do we all come together and identify the highest demand employees and then build pipelines that will be creating that flow into our advanced manufacturers? We
Well, I know
can't keep using the old tools, Carl. I think we all got excited about incentives to bring businesses to our state. Well, let's keep them and grow them.
Yeah.
Let's keep our people and grow them. That's where the game's going to be won now. A lot of these folks are building a first generation workforce when it comes to doing commercial jets, when it comes to building cars. They want to be able to get to the point where they have a third or fourth generation workforce where the father and the grandfather have also built the jet or built the automobile. But starting out, we've got to create those talent pipelines. So I just think we have to think afresh and differently. I think we have to get technology integrated into our K through 12 system in a heavy dose. How are we using these tools? How are we training young people to use the tools that they'll use in the place of work where they go to work and be productive someday? So I think there's a lot of things we've got pointed in the right direction, and now we just have to be more sophisticated in short game, but more importantly, long game, keeping our eye on what good looks like in 2040 or 2050.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to publicly thank Brian. Brian helped us kick off our apprenticeship program a few years ago. COVID just decimated it just because you couldn't get kids into some workplaces during COVID, but we're back at relaunching that, working with the Greenville Chamber in doing some internship programs. Launch Columbia will be here next spring, and things that Laura McKinney, our new workforce director, is working on. All these things matter in the sense there's no one size fits all approach for workforce, for education, for training, but you got to do something a lot of little things to make a big difference. And so I think that's the name of the game, right?
Yeah, it's interesting when Carl and I had a chance to share the stage recently and speaking to a group that was Early Childhood Education Summit. And I think one of the favorite phrases he and I used is that there's no silver bullet, but you got to fire a lot of accurate lead bullets to deal with these complex issues. And I think that the states that are most proactive in building strong public-private partnerships and consistently firing those lead bullets at the right targets are going to be the ones that win. And we've got a demonstrated capability in South Carolina to do that. One of the beauties of less than 6 million people is we're a state that can work across state and be collaborative at all levels. So it gives us a good shot to shoot those lead bullets and have some wins.
Great. Just point of clarification, we initially had Carlos was going to join us today. Carlos from Greenville, and he reluctantly had to pass on us because he's a new football dad, if you will. He's a proud parent of his son just got drafted by the New York Giants. So I want to give a shout out to Carlos. Sorry he couldn't be with us today, but the Giants did beat beat the Lions last night. So good on him. He was up for the first game, so I know he was a proud pop last night. All right, real quick, we had one question in the chat room. Hold on, let me just lost it. Come on, chat. All right, Susan, thank you. South Carolina Healthy Business Challenge is a free collaborative program sponsored by Blue Cross Blue Shield, designed to empower business across the state to prioritize health and wellness of their employees. Absolutely related to workforce recruitment and retention. That's a valuable piece. We both talk about this, and we learned a lot about this in Dallas. But when you're talking about incentives for employees, pay is a big piece of it, but it ain't the only thing. It's the work-life balance. It's the healthy. It's all the incentives that go along with that, and a healthy environment is very important to this young generation, more so than I ever thought it would ever be. So good comments there, Susan. Brian, you got any pearls of wisdom you want to leave? I don't want to last too long on this because I know everybody's got to go back to work. But they've learned more today from you than they have from years listening to me talk on a Friday morning. So thank you. Other pearls of wisdom. What any other last thing you want to see? Let's talk one last thing. Let's talk energy, because energy is going to be the other component that we got to deal with on the state house level. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think we're needing to really wake up to the reality of looking at our energy sufficiency as a state. One of the keynote things that was shared in Rebecca Ryan's keynote that we mentioned earlier is that historically, annually, we've had a 0.5% increase in demand for energy nationwide. And Carl's going to double check me on my math, but I think the demand in the years ahead is going to be somewhere around 80% increase.
Load forecast for the next 5 years is expected to increase by 81%.
Yeah. Oh, good. I remembered something.
Yeah. 81%.
81%, where we've been doing a 0.5% load increase. So I think that's going to require all of us to look at the breadth and scope of how we generate power, but also it's going to require us to look at some conservation-based utilization of power as individuals, as homeowners, as business leaders, and as regions. Because I'm not sure, and neither was Rebecca Ryan, probably only Carl Blackstone knows how we're going to be able to trend up to that demand load. So it's real. I think we're going to see rolling brownouts in certain parts of our nation because of all the things we use that require power at a higher level than ever before. So it is one that we're focused on as a Metro Chamber Coalition. I think all of us need to be thoughtful and respectful around learning how we can aid our state in determining the best possible energy policy for the next 25 years.
Good news is the General Assembly's ahead of it, right? I mean, they know this is a big deal. They focused on, the governor had an energy summit last summer that was really good, focusing on the need for not only look at our electrical grid, our way we create power, generation of power, but also the need for natural gas. And that's another big piece of this as well. So, all right, how about that? I want to close it out because I know people got to go back to work, but Brian, thank you for helping me today and really thinking. He's a big thinker, and I always enjoy listening to Brian and making sure that we're, as a sounding board, thinking about the same things. And he just says it a lot more eloquently than I do. So thanks for your time. Folks, we really appreciate you being with us today. It was a blast to talk a little bit. I hadn't seen y'all in a while. It's good to see a bunch of faces. I'm sorry I didn't get a call on everybody that had their cameras turned off, because I'd like to do that, Brian, just call them out, quite frankly, but I didn't do it today. I was trying to be respectful of my guest, but thanks for everybody tuning in. Y'all be safe, stay cool. It's going to be a little humid this weekend, so drink lots of fluids. And for the love of Pete, if you're driving on the interstate, please drive in the right lane. Thank you so much. Brian, thanks for being with us. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Carl. And I want to thank every business leader on the call. I think in that public-private partnership equation, my last pearl of wisdom, it's the private sector's time. I think a lot of times we default to the public sector. They are a partner with their sleeves rolled up and ready to go. But it's time for the private sector to exercise both community and statewide leadership. So let's go get it done.
All right. Sounds good. Great thought to leave on. All right. Y'all be good. Be careful. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Carl.